In 1824, a geologist named William Buckland pulled a skull from a quarry in Oxfordshire and told the scientific world something extraordinary had once walked the earth. He called it Megalosaurus, the first dinosaur ever formally named. And from that moment, dinosaurs swallowed everything: the museums, the films, the public imagination, the mythology of prehistoric life. But Buckland made a mistake that went uncorrected for nearly 2 centuries. He assumed dinosaurs were beginning, that before them, the land was quieter, smaller, more primitive. He was wrong. And the truth of what actually ruled before the dinosaurs is one of the most genuinely shocking stories in the history of life on this planet. By the time the first dinosaur existed, another group of animals had already dominated every continent for over 100 million years, built apex predator body plans, scaled to sizes that rival the largest dinosaurs we know, developed teeth of a complexity that modern science still struggles to explain. And here's the part that should stop you cold. These weren't forgotten relatives of dinosaurs. They were amphibians, the same lineage that gives us frogs today. And what the world did to them, what the air itself did to them, is something I didn't expect when I started researching this. See, to understand why prehistoric amphibians became so monstrous, you have to understand the atmosphere they were breathing. Go back to the Carboniferous period, around 360 million years ago. The continents are still fused, the oceans are warm, and the air contains oxygen at roughly 35%. Today, that number sits at 21. And that gap, those 14 percentage points, changed everything. Because oxygen at that concentration doesn't just sustain life, it accelerates it. More oxygen means more energy extracted from every breath. More energy means faster metabolism. Faster metabolism means faster growth rates. And faster growth rates mean the upper limits on body size. Limits evolution had spent millions of years establishing. Simply stopped applying. The ceiling was gone, and life went to places it had never reached before. Insects hit those limits first. Dragonflies with 2-foot wingspans. Millipedes stretching 6 feet long. Scorpions the size of dogs. But something else was making landfall for the first time. Something that would take this oxygen-flooded world and use it to build animals that had no business being that large. The first vertebrates came ashore roughly 375 million years ago. Lobe-finned fish with muscular, arm-like fins began hauling themselves onto mudflats for short stretches. Their descendants developed primitive lungs. Their fins thickened into limbs. And over millions of years, they completed the crossing from water to land. And here's what that moment means in evolutionary terms. When you are the first vertebrate predator on land, you inherit a world with nothing above you. No competition. No established hierarchy. No apex predator occupying the niche you're about to step into. The land wasn't just a new habitat. It was an open vacuum. And evolution fills vacuums completely. The Temnospondyls filled this one. And I'd be willing to bet you've never heard that name. Temnospondyls. A group so obscure, they barely exist outside of paleontology papers, despite being among the most extraordinary animals that ever lived. Prionosuchus, one of the largest, reached 9 meters in length, 30 feet, a skull the size of a car hood, body weight exceeding a ton, moving to the swamps of what is now Brazil, in a world so geographically different that modern place names almost feel dishonest. But it helps to imagine it. A 9-meter amphibian, heavier than a white rhinoceros, hunting in waterways that no longer exist. But the size isn't actually the most interesting thing about these animals. What genuinely surprised me when I dug into this was their teeth. Cut a temnospondyl tooth in cross-section and look at it under a microscope. What you find has no business being in an amphibian. The dentine folds back on itself in complex, layered, labyrinthine patterns. Layer inside layer inside layer. A structural design that distributes bite force across multiple internal surfaces, preventing the tooth from shattering under extreme stress. The same principle as a crumple zone in a modern car. These were not fragile amphibian teeth. These were teeth engineered by millions of years of selection pressure for processing things that resisted being eaten: armored fish, giant arthropods, early reptiles, each other. Paleontologists named them labyrinthodonts, meaning labyrinth-toothed. And once you understand what that architecture implies about what they were biting, the name starts to feel modest. So here's the question. If these animals were this dominant, this well-armed, this large, why does almost nobody know they existed? The answer is that the world that built them stopped existing. And it didn't stop slowly. Around 305 million years ago, the event paleontologists call the Carboniferous rainforest collapse reshaped the entire planet's surface. The vast cold swamp forests that carpeted continents began fragmenting. The climate dried, humidity dropped, and the continuous swamp systems connecting amphibian populations across thousands of miles broke apart into isolated patches. What had been one enormous interconnected ecosystem became hundreds of shrinking habitat islands. Populations that roamed continents became stranded. Genetic diversity collapsed. The giant amphibians began disappearing, not catastrophically, not in a single event, but steadily, the way something disappears when conditions it depends on slowly withdraw. And into the drying world that followed came one thing that changed everything: an egg, not just any egg, the amniotic egg, a sealed capsule with its own internal moisture supply, wrapped in a leathery or mineralized shell. This egg could be laid in dry soil, on rocky slopes, deep in the interior of continents, far from any water. The early reptiles that carried it could follow the retreating moisture into territory that was slowly becoming a death sentence for everything else. And over millions of years, that one reproductive advantage quietly compounded into total ecological dominance. Think about what that means. The most fearsome land predators in Earth's history were not wiped out by an asteroid, not buried by a supervolcano, not outfought by something larger or more dangerous. They were undone by a better egg, something you could hold in your hand. And for 2 centuries of paleontology, we were so dazzled by what came after that we barely registered what had been lost. But before we leave these animals, Mastodonsaurus deserves a moment. Its skull measured over a meter from end to end. Its jaw was lined with interlocking cone-shaped teeth that meshed together when closed like the teeth of a mechanical trap. Biomechanical modeling puts its bite force in the range of a large modern saltwater crocodile, 5,000 pounds per square inch or above. It ambushed from shallow water, erupting upward with a strike that left virtually no window for reaction. And Prionosuchus, one of the last surviving giant amphibians, held on in cold water refuges in what is now Australia well into the early Cretaceous, the cold water being the one thing keeping crocodilians from competing with it directly, until global temperatures began rising. The water warmed by degrees. The crocodilians move in, and that was it. Prionosuchus wasn't killed. It wasn't defeated. It lost its refuge. And that distinction matters, because it's the pattern that defines every giant amphibian. Not failure, not weakness, perfect calibration to a specific world, followed by that world changing in ways the calibration had no answer for. And here's the detail I keep returning to. The cold swamp forests of the Carboniferous fell into waterlogged peat and didn't decompose, because bacteria capable of breaking down lignin hadn't evolved yet. Those fallen trees piled up for millions of years, compressed eventually into the coal seams that ran the Industrial Revolution, the steam engines, the furnaces, the factories that built the modern world. That coal is the compressed remains of the forest these animals hunted through. When it burns, it releases carbon locked underground since the Carboniferous. You are burning the world that made the giant amphibians. That's not a metaphor. That's chemistry. What's left of them today is the part that stays with me. A frog on a rock, a salamander under a log, a caecilian, limbless and nearly blind, burrowing through tropical soil. These are the survivors of the lineage that produced the apex predators of the Carboniferous. The frog's moist skin, the exact feature that makes it fragile and water-dependent today, is the remnant of a body plan, that once scaled to 30 feet. The salamander's slow, sprawling gait is the echo of a locomotion pattern that carried monsters across ancient floodplains. They didn't become small because they failed. They became small because the world they were shaped for collapsed around them. Evolution doesn't reward greatness. It rewards fit. And when the fit disappears, even the greatest things shrink down to almost nothing. Dinosaurs get the mythology, the museums, the films, the names children learn before they can read. But vertebrates walked on land before any dinosaur existed. The first footprints, the first breath of air, the first predatory teeth on dry ground, the first bony armor, all of it belonged to the amphibians. They were first. They lasted longest. And by the time the dinosaurs arrived, the age that defined them was already over. They're still here, smaller now, quieter, living in the margins of a world that moved on without them. You've seen them. You probably held one. You just didn't know you were holding the last survivor of the most dominant land predators this planet has ever produced.